The Kawai SX-210 and SX-240 were two of the first synths that I reviewed for this channel. And after visiting many additional synths in different videos over the past year and a half, I wanted to come back to the SX-210 and see if it still had the magic that I experienced when we first did the video. Let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Zach Marr from Alamo Music here in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, turn your notifications. This is our Alamo Sound Lab channel where we talk about all things music tech related. And today we're revisiting the Kawai SX-210 and asking the question, is it worth it? We did a video about a year and a half ago on the SX-240 and the SX-210 under the heading of Since That Time Forgot. And this SX-210 since then has kind of doubled in value. There's been kind of a renaissance of interest in vintage synths, and the prices have doubled on pretty much all vintage synths in the last 12 months or so, kind of strangely. I think everybody's been locked down trying to figure out what to do, and vintage or synths in general, but particularly vintage synths, have become a very interesting thing for people to spend time, energy, and money exploring. I know that's been the case for myself. It's become one of my ways of coping over the last 18 months or so. It's been a wild journey and I've enjoyed it very much. And the SX-210 by Kawai, which was manufactured by Teisco, a company that Kawai purchased to do all of their non-piano related kind of manufacturing in I think the late 60s. But began to brand with the Kawai name for products, guitar products, even synthesizer products, because the Kawai had a stronger brand name than Teisco, which didn't have the strongest reputation. This comes from that era of synthesizers from Kawai. There's another era that we've reviewed in some other videos with the K3, the K4, the K1, where there was a kind of breaking point, and these were more, I don't think Teisco manufactured those synthesizers. That was more Kawai itself, kind of took it in-house. But there is kind of a cult following for Teisco / Kawai synthesizers. The SX-400, the 110 monosynth, the 100F are all synths that people really talk a lot about. And the SX-210 and SX-240 are also really respected and liked, but they're also incredibly rare. And I remember when I picked the SX-210 up and the SX-240, I was really impressed with the way they sounded and just the kind of tone and flair that they had. And after playing a whole bunch of other vintage synths, I wanted to come back and revisit and see if I was just, if the magic was still there for me. So let's talk about what's under the hood that makes this somewhat interesting. It has SSM 2044 filter, which is kind of a revered filter. A lot of the filter chips that were in synths at this time, most of them were using Curtis chips and not the SSM chips. And the SSM 2044 is known for having kind of a warmer sound, darker sound than the Curtis chips that you found in a lot of synthesizers. Early Prophet 5s had SSM, as well as a number of other synths that are kind of sought after for the fact that they had the SSM. And so the SX-210 employs that filter, and that's part of what gives it its tone. It has an interesting tone. It's very clean, and it is also very present and kind of foregrounded. It's not dark, it's not overwhelming from a kind of harmonic standpoint. It's a very good companion synth, I would say. It doesn't overwhelm you, and it's almost difficult for it to stand on its own. It makes some interesting sounds, but it pairs well with other louder synths. It's kind of a good ensemble synth, I would say. Speaking of ensemble, its ensemble effect that it has on it is really pleasant, well implemented. The other things that are of note, it has portamento and glissando on it as in the feature set, which is fairly rare. What it doesn't have, which made it unsuccessful at the time, it doesn't have any MIDI. It doesn't have really any connectivity You can't. There's not even a foot pedal, so there's no way to even attach a foot pedal to it. So it's got very basic connectivity, and it lacks. It only has a single LFO. It's got a rotary dial, which had become kind of in trend. People often refer to this synth as competing with the Juno 60 and the Poly 6, but it's really more Poly 61 era where you were going away from hands-on controls. It was more the choose a parameter. It was all in the front. You could choose all the parameters, but you would dial in the value with a knob. So it's more Alpha Juno, Poly 61 era synth. It was late to the game. It was DCO based instead of VCO based, and it has a good tone. One other thing, you can stack. You can go into stack all the oscillators. It's got 8 voices. You can stack them in unison or kind of double them in a 4-voice polyphony. But even that, it is not the heaviest or the loudest synth. It's very kind of pristine and pleasant to listen to. It doesn't have a lot of nasty tones in it. It's got a pretty broad sweet spot. You could also argue a kind of boring tonal palette. It's not the widest variety. It also only has a single LFO, which you can route to the VCF, the VCA, but it's not super interesting from a modulation standpoint. And the LFO, you can choose a couple different waveforms and also reverse them, but again, not super interesting from a kind of implementation standpoint or a modulation standpoint. So it's a little boring, it's a little vanilla, but when you play it, there is a certain tone it has that's unique. It's got its own flavor alongside Korg, Yamaha, Roland synths of this era. It definitely has its own voice, which makes it interesting. It's its own palette. So let's take a listen, and we'll conclude with some final thoughts as to whether or not this is still worth it. Is it worth the prices it's commanding, both from a musical standpoint and kind of a financial standpoint? So let's take a listen, and we'll conclude with that. So there you have it, the SX-210. I do like its tone. I think it pairs nicely. I didn't pair it with anything in this video, so you can kind of see it's a little plain, a little boring. The action on it is great, but it doesn't have any velocity sensitivity or aftertouch, and so again, that's very primitive in terms of kind of its synthesis capabilities. And for the time, also kind of not the, it wasn't a ton of value add. When it came out, I think it was like £1,000. From what I found an article that was reviewing it, and it was interesting because the reviewer really liked Teisco Kawai era synths, and he was trying to make the case that it was interesting and a good synth, but he was struggling in the article, and he didn't say anything negative about it. It's hard to say anything negative about it, but at the same time, it's hard to get overly excited about it. I think what's interesting about it is it has its own palette, its own kind of tone, which is unique, but it's limited in what you can do. So from a musical standpoint, it is unique. A collectability standpoint, there aren't a lot of them out there in circulation. It's estimated that there was a few thousand sold most. They're commanding prices now from anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000. So if you have that kind of discretionary income, maybe it's one nice one to add to the collection. It probably won't go down in value because of their rarity. They're also pretty stable. I don't hear a lot of people talk about issues with the synth. So from an investment standpoint, probably not the worst one that you can buy, and it's not crazy priced, but it is expensive for what it is, and it is fairly basic. I don't think I am as crazy about it as I was when I reviewed it initially. I have to admit I probably was a little too excited about it at the time. In retrospect, as I've played more synths from this era, I can see why this one was forgotten about. But it is a fun synth. It does have its own tone and its own place. And the action's great. I really like the action. It's one of the better actions I've played on a synth from this era. And the Kawai build quality is really nice, and it looks cool. So interesting piece. Would love to hear your thoughts. Who else owns one? What other things that I not covered did I forget about? Would love to hear your comments below. And if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, turn your notifications, let us know what else you'd like to see. Thank you for watching. And if you'd like to talk more, visit us at alamomusic.com. We'd love to see you there. Hope you have a great day, and until next time.